everyone to After Dark. Ted, how are you doing tonight?
Kara, I am well. I am really excited about our show tonight and our featured guest because we have an amazing topic that's extremely timely. And I want to welcome Len Bellavia, who is the founding partner at Bellavia Blatt, perhaps better known as dealerlaw.com. Len, welcome to the Fixed Ops Roundtable.
Ted and Kara, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Good to see you again, Ted.
I am so excited for tonight's conversation. I know it's going to be something that a lot of people are interested in, want to learn more about. I know Len's going to have so many great things to teach us today. But before we jump into that, I do want to thank our wonderful sponsors, BG Products, Partners Beyond Products. I was thinking, which way is this? But it's over here. Yeah. So thank you to BG. We appreciate everything you do for the Fixed Ops Roundtable and our After Dark show. We wouldn't be able to do this without you guys. So thank you so much, BG Products.
Right. And Kara, BG, as you know, is celebrating their 50th anniversary this year. And that says a lot about a company to be in the automotive industry, in the automotive retail industry for 50 years. So congratulations to them on their first 50 years. I was looking at automotive news, Kara, just about maybe 10 days ago, and I saw on the cover there was a story with our friend Len Bellavia on there about the OEMs and the dealer franchise system, and perhaps, just maybe, that the OEMs are thinking about perhaps piercing that dealer franchise system once again, Len, in using electrification perhaps as the means to do that. So I reached out, Kara, to invite Len, and Len, I think this is a very timely conversation.
Well, thank you, Ted. Thank you for having me, Kara. And yeah, this is quite topical. You know, it's hard to read an automotive publication without some reference to what's in store for the franchise system. Some good, some bad, some legal, and some not so legal. So it seems like what's getting a lot of attention are how to restructure the sales distribution system, what's permitted, what's not permitted, how dealers should navigate it, how manufacturers should navigate it. So there's lots to talk about. And yes, it's been very busy the past couple of weeks since these headlines have come to the forefront.
And I'm sure your firm is very busy, Len, because there's been a lot of talk. And it seems that there's a couple, maybe 2 or 3 OEMs that have really taken the lead on this. And I saw some quotes from Jim Farley recently, which got a lot of headlines. And I figure we kind of cut right to the chase, Len, with all the talk about the dealer direct factory, online sales, perhaps going in that direction. Are dealers going to be at risk of being cut out of the sales process that's been in place for you and your family and all these dealers for the last 100 years or so?
Well, it's good that you point out that the franchise system has been in place for 100 and something years, because, it begs the question, well, is something that's not broken really in need of being fixed, right? The old adage. So, when people come on the forefront, automotive executives, their first instinct is, this is my chance to cure what ails the distribution system. So it's not new. The concept of radicalizing and revolutionary changes to the auto franchise system is nothing new. We saw it, in the 80s, starting in the 80s, and then, with Saturn and the way that was distributed, and the Ford Auto Collection, that was going to be the manufacturers getting into retailing, and then the internet was going to put the dealers out of business. So, we could probably write a book on all of the things that were supposed to radically change the way cars get sold to the public. But lo and behold, we seem to always revert back to the good old hometown dealer. But I would say this is probably the most serious potential threat to the dealer franchise system. And, maybe foundationally, what I know dealers know this and manufacturers know it, but it can't hurt to remind everyone that all 50 states have enacted franchise laws that specifically address protections for franchise dealers. So yes, while there are potential threats to the franchise system, all of those threats can be rebuffed by virtue of the existing franchise. We call it, schematic. There's a statutory scheme across the country. Every state has their own laws. They all are a little bit different, but they essentially say the same thing, and that's it. That is, manufacturers build the cars and dealers sell the cars. and neither the twain shall meet. Now, suddenly we're at a crossroads where manufacturers are finding, looking closely at this whole Tesla phenomenon, and I think making giant leaps into assuming that that same business model can be implemented in the conventional franchise system and achieve the same good results. And that's where I think there's a divergence of opinion on both the manufacturer and the dealer level, and what to do about it. So,
Len, if I may, at some of the recent fixed ops roundtables, two dealers come to mind. One is Tully Williams at the Nilo Company out in Sacramento, because we're hearing from Tully that approximately 25% of sales in California now are Tesla, and electrification has really, really grown, and that is affecting the fixed operations department, in terms of, the technicians and the caliber of people that they're looking for as well. And then we're also hearing from folks like Ed Roberts down at Bozard Ford Lincoln in St. Augustine, which is probably the biggest shop on the East Coast, with 100 service bays and 90 some technicians, plus another 11 mobile service bays on these mobile trucks for Ford going out there. We're hearing that not only do the dealers have to ramp up, in terms of the infrastructure for the EVs, but now this model of going out to the customer, which Tesla has been doing, is being seriously looked at in fixed operations.
I think any manufacturer can take a page from a competitor. So they'll always be looking at each other's playbook and borrowing from it. Tesla has some very unique concepts that some have worked and some haven't been worked. Some have been embraced and some have been rejected. So it's not all positive news, but on the whole, I think it's opened the eyes of manufacturers. Look, I think dealers and manufacturers, more manufacturers than dealers, will say that things need to change because the public doesn't like the present system of buying a car. And I'm in that boat too. I drive cars, and when I'm not buying a car my family sells, I hope they're not watching, then I have to go and become Joe Public myself. And it's not pleasant, and it's not convenient to sit in the showroom for 3 hours, trying to negotiate a deal. So I think dealers in large part would agree that something needs to be fixed there, and many of them are on board with it and have actually come up with, I think, pretty radical changes for the positive in making the customer experience good. But the problem with the term customer experience is it's being relied upon too heavily as a scapegoat for changing the whole system. I mean, dealers and manufacturers are in lockstep. They both want the consumer experience to be positive. So sometimes the manufacturers say, well, we're going to invoke these changes because we need to change the way dealers treat consumers. But dealers treat consumers pretty well. I mean, they try anyway. They're fraught with the same problems that we all have, finding good employees that subscribe to the mission statement of the dealership. But on the whole, I mean, I know when I go in and family goes in, on the whole, the experience is very good, because that's what a competitive economic environment lends itself to. You do a better job, you get more customers, you get repeat business. So dealers don't need training on that. But manufacturers naturally want to try and nip the problem in the bud. So they see Tesla's model and make the assumption, and I consider it to be a giant leap of faith, that that model is going to work with the legacy manufacturers. And, I owe it, it's hard for me to stay in my lane as a lawyer, right? Because sometimes I'm talking about retailing. And in part, I think there's a natural overlap, because to address a legal problem, you have to understand the client's plight. And the other side of the coin is, I grew up in the car business. My father, my uncle, my grandfather owned car dealerships. My cousin still does. My brother still runs so I can't go to Thanksgiving dinner without hearing about retailing cars. I don't hear anything about the law. It's all about, what changes are in store for the car business. So there's overlap. So I'll give you my legal perspective, but it might be, dressed up in retail parlance. So what I can tell you is my experience is that manufacturers are on the right track. They shouldn't lean too heavy into the Tesla Rivian model, because we all know, and your audiences are dealers, so they know. I don't want to sing to the choir here, but they are well aware of the differences between the Tesla model and how it would work in mainstream automotive America. So yes, it's good to borrow some digital outcome, better, good service on the sale end, no negotiating, but is what play it to its natural conclusion. If Ford, since we're talking about Ford and they seem to be in the headlines, if Ford actually does implement a system where if you want to buy an EV, you've got to do it online at MSRP because consumers don't want to negotiate and it's faster, all right, that's all well and good. But what happens if Chevy decides they're not going to do that and they're going to flood, historically have every model on the dealer's lot? Let's just draw a comparison. What's going to happen? Is Ford going to lose market share simply because they think digital is the better way to go? And the consumers that don't like to go to dealer, I don't like to go to the dentist, but the dentist is not coming to my house, so I have to go. So same thing holds true. There are some things that consumers just, bite their gums and move ahead and go to the dealership and go to the service department. It's a necessary evil, and I don't mean evil in the true sense of the word, but there's middle ground. I think the bottom line is there needs to be middle ground. And what I've been advocating is that dealers need to flex their collective muscle because they have collective muscle. They never really like to do that because, the relationship is based on the human, the human element. The human element is make nice and you'll get good results. And that holds true. And that generally is the rule. And no manufacturer wants to be sued by a dealer and no dealer wants to sue a manufacturer. So the fact that I talk about these statutes doesn't mean necessarily that dealers have to go to court, but they need to be mindful and they need to, I used in the other interview you referenced, put the loaded gun on the table, not with the intent of shooting it, but just to level the playing field, so to speak. And dealers are at a point where they need to do that and they can't be bashful or timid about preserving the inherent value of their franchise, because what we're seeing now is dealerships being sold for record multiples. Well, that could easily change. That could easily change if the future of the value of the franchise is eviscerated by implementing some of these ideas.
Very true. Very true. And what other manufacturer programs do you think dealers are viewing as intrusions on this franchise model?
Well, it's not just direct sales. It's, let's just take Volkswagen as an example. There's a lot of discussion out there about the Scout and how that may be distributed in a way that doesn't involve the dealers. Well, as a point of law, they can't do that. They can talk about it, but the franchise laws in all 50 states say manufacturers cannot sell, dealers sell. So can they create this entity that's separate from Volkswagen and say, well, we're not selling, XYZ Corp is selling the Scout. Well, the judges are pretty sophisticated. You can't do an end run around the franchise law by creating a shill entity and saying we don't control it. So short of whatever company that they decide to distribute it through will probably be owned or controlled by Volkswagen. So that's really a distinction without a difference. So there's an example of something that can be thwarted. The Ford, it's not just about direct selling. That's a simple example, right? What about appraising trade-ins? Now, why should a dealer, forget about the fact that that's engaging in the sale of a vehicle, because to the extent you're negotiating the value of a trade-in, you're engaging in selling, which is prohibited by a manufacturer. But more than that, why should a dealer be saddled with whatever? Dealers have differences of opinion on the valuation of a trade-in, right? You can get 10 dealers in a room and have 10 different prices. So it's not a science, but dealers are masters of the art. And I put my money on a dealer appraising a trade-in as opposed to a factory executive. I've said this over the years, kind of tongue in cheek, but I really do believe it. And that is, nobody should be an executive at an automaker unless they've spent 6 months in a showroom selling cars. So that should be a rite of passage into, the executive boardroom of an auto manufacturer, because often, ask any dealer, when they visit with a factory executive and the factory executive is explaining to them how to do a better job at retailing. Talk about biting your tongue. So, all this leads to is negotiating, just sitting around a table. Look, that's not anything new. That's what dealer counsel do. Manufacturers go around the country as part of their regular routine, touching base with dealers and getting input. But, dealers on the whole, and I've represented them for 35 years, try and avoid confrontation because you never know when they're looking for the next buy sell or an open point or a factory. So they have a reason not to push too hard. And I'm sensitive to that because I often get called to ask, should I sue? Win the battle, lose the war. So you're always better at trying to get some leverage so that you can get to a negotiating table and accomplish your mission. So to the extent that dealers are very concerned about what Ford and VW and Volvo has been doing in terms of direct selling, I think they've got to get on the phone with their dealer council and say, look, it's time to really draw the line in the sand. The state dealer associations, I think, historically have done an excellent job. I mean, these laws wouldn't be on the books without state dealer associations. So they have given dealers all of the ammunition they need. And I don't mean to use war terminology because no one likes to talk in those terms. But if you have a $20 million business, if you include the real estate, and somebody is telling you that we're going to take away everything that is inherently valuable in your franchise, well, shame on you if you sit idly by and let it happen. And dealers are famous for I'll let somebody else fight that fight. There's always somebody else. There's 17,000 of us. I'm one, maybe one of the other 16,000, and so we'll wage the war. But collectively, dealers have an awful lot of muscle, and that's what dealer council is for, and state associations. They really need to get dealers together in a united front and use the franchise laws to their advantage, and then try and level the playing field that way.
Len, you mentioned something a little bit earlier that struck a nerve. You mentioned the Ford collection, and you and I are old enough to remember that. I don't know that Kara is, but Kara, in the mid to late 90s, Ford went out to several markets. I was in Rochester, New York, so that's how I know that one. And they went in and bought up all their dealers in those markets. I believe Salt Lake City was another market as well. And they bought all those franchises, and Ford was going to be the retailer. And Ford, I believe, Len, I don't know the exact structure, but I believe they kept the dealer on in a capacity to run that operation. But it was proven within a short period of time, I believe less than 2 years, that Ford could not do that successfully and ended up selling to the very same dealers their franchises back at, I believe, pennies on the dollar.
That's exactly what happened. And, to Ford's credit, they were experimenting to see if they could build a better mousetrap. But I think in the end, the lesson that was learned is that nobody knows the market areas that these dealerships are in better than a dealer principal. I mean, they're invested in more than just, the obvious, the real estate and the bricks and mortar. They're invested in the churches, the communities, the hospitals. They know the key players in the communities. You can't manufacture that from Detroit or from Japan. That's homegrown, and the inherent value in that is overwhelming. And it's a little aggravating to dealers and to people that represent dealers that, interlopers, and I don't mean factory executives necessarily, but just look at all of the, startups out there that think that they can unseat the dealers and do a better job. And we're starting to see some of them, not gain traction because they sooner or later learn that, there are certain things that cannot be replaced, and that is the dealer's knowledge of their customers and their market.
Yeah.
Len, do you think this is all about just copying that Tesla model? Is it a stock play? Because certainly the stock at General Motors and Ford has received a boost with this talk about electrification. And is that a smart thing for the OEM to do, to copy that Tesla model?
Well, first of all, I think we start out with the premise that it's difficult to be an OEM executive. I'll give some credit because you're playing to various constituencies that you have to please if you're going to make it from point A to point B. So let's start out with the federal government. The federal government wants to see that all of the auto manufacturers are on target to meet their EPA goals. So the idea that manufacturers are saying we're going all EV, I mean, that's the music that the regulators want to hear. But take note of the fact that, is it sincere? I mean, sometimes you have to throw billions of dollars at a problem just to buy some piece. So you might say, well, it is real because look at all the money that's being spent. But let me be cynical for a second and say, if I'm at a boardroom at an OEM, am I saying, listen, we're going to have to placate the federal government. It may cost us $5 or $10 billion to be able to go down this trail towards EV, and then we'll let the consumers decide, we'll put EVs out there and we'll let consumers decide whether they really want them. And that's a real shaky bet, right? Because we all know the reasons why consumers might not embrace EVs. We don't have to go down the whole list. We've read about it and we've heard about it, but that's one constituent that the auto manufacturers have to play to. And take note of Mercedes and Audi and some of the others who say, well, we're going to be all EV by 2035. One of them was even 2040. Now, we all know, without being in the automotive manufacturing business, that if auto manufacturers wanted to make EVs 100% of their lineup, they could probably do that in less than 20 years, probably less than 5 years. So when they talk about 2035 and 2040, is that really just kicking the can down the road to see how much time they can buy with the regulators? Then you have investors, right? Because investors are seeing the stock value of Tesla. They want to see that replicated with the traditional legacy manufacturers. So when people like Jim Farley make these announcements about the future of automotive retailing, notice he's not making it in front of, it's not at NADA when all the dealers are in the room. It's at an investors conference. So what to make of that? Is he just playing to his audience? And wouldn't those type of proclamations be made to the key players, your dealer partners? So another bit of suggestion that maybe this is really feigned and not real. And also keep in mind, manufacturers want to look like they're state of the art, right? Buick is changing its logo, and I can go down the line of how each manufacturer is throwing something out there to show the general public that they're cutting edge. So a lot of that could just be branding and not really a 100% buy-in to the EV model. I mean, there's going to be market share for EVs. I don't think anybody will deny that. But is it going to be, right now it's less than 5%. Is it going to be 10%, 15%? There's still going to be a lion's share of consumers out there that are not going to want change. It seems like we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, except that manufacturers are throwing 70 or 80% of their customers out to try and satisfy the 20 or 30% of consumers who might be interested in an EV. So something's amiss. So I think it's creating a lot of consternation amongst dealers, because they're saying, well, if this isn't real, do I fight it? Or do I let, retailing kind of find its own natural level? Because if it's not going to be a hit, like all the manufacturers are saying it's going to be, then why do I need to worry? Well, they need to worry because if it takes 2 or 3 years for the manufacturers to regroup and say, oops, let's go back to ICE vehicles, or focus at least on them because that's the majority of the market share. Dealers, they could lose their entire empire by then. Yes, they're making a lot of money now, and that's another reason why I think, Jim Farley, who's a very astute business person, is making these announcements now, because dealers are more likely to look the other way when they're making millions of dollars a year. It's just not something, it's not an immediate threat, right? They're saying, make these announcements when dealers are really struggling financially, and you'll see them all come to the boardroom, so to speak. So it's a very astute time, for Jim Farley to make these announcements, because dealers are not really willing to upset the apple cart. They're enjoying the status quo. So there's a lot going on in the background that if you were sitting there trying to dissect, what's fact and what's fiction, it's a lot easier for Ford and others to move the ball down while keeping the dealer's attention, in the showroom, trying to continue to make the kind of money they're making right now. So it's somewhat diversionary, in my opinion. And if dealers don't pay close attention, then it may be too late. Because I can't tell you, and I'm sure other lawyers of all types will tell you, that when you go into court, let's assume, 6 months or 12 months or 2 years from now, dealers say, you know what, this wasn't a bluff. They really are going to adopt this agency model or make us glorified delivery centers. So it wasn't a bluff. So now we should go to court. Well, guess what judges say in that case? They say, well, you knew this 3 years ago. How much of an emergency can this be? You just decided to wait. So it takes away the urgency and some of the relief that's available to parties that are aggrieved. If a franchise law is being violated and you don't invoke your rights, well, the courts are not going to be too sympathetic. So keeping the dealer's eyes off the ball is probably a strategic move on the part of some of these manufacturers. And the other part of it is, manufacturers want to test dealers' resolve. So, Volvo was really the first one out of the box to do this direct selling. And, I was calling Volvo dealers and saying, what are you doing about this? Say, well, we'll see how it plays out. I'm making a lot of money with them right now. I don't want to be the squeaky wheel. And well, so what do manufacturers do? They say, listen, we can break these franchise laws with impunity. Dealers don't do anything about it. We get letters, we'll get a letter, we'll get an email. The state association might write a letter, and we read it and we file it. But the less dealers fight back, the more emboldened OEMs become. So these are the messages that I think state dealer associations should be getting out to their members, not to start lawsuits necessarily, but to strategize and figure out a way to level the playing field by using the franchise laws. I spoke about, getting dealers together so no one is standing out alone as a radical renegade dealer, anti-factory. So the way I've done it, in the past, and other lawyers that do what I do, you get class actions, where no one's out there as a single, enemy of the manufacturer. You get theoretically thousands of dealers by virtue of being part of the same class, and you seek the relief kind of in an anonymous way. State dealer associations, many of them, based on some of, it's fact sensitive, but they have standing under the law, even though they're not a franchise dealer. I mean, we've seen California's state association do that. New Jersey has done that. Other state associations have gone to the mat on behalf of dealers. So it takes away the concern that, addresses the concerns that dealers have of being renegades or bad apples. So state associations really do have an important role to play to kind of put a stop to it. We call it maintaining the status quo. So stop all this talk. Let's get in a room, dealer council, and try and work it out. Because to a large extent, they're aligned. Everybody wants consumers to be happy. Everyone wants market share. The legacy manufacturers want market share to stay with them as opposed to Rivian and Tesla. So they have a lot more in common than they do differences. It's just a question of, putting down their arms, stopping all the hyperbole, and level the playing field and get something accomplished.
Wow. And what do you think will happen with this EV integration happening so quickly? What do you think is going to happen to the variable side? Because I envision this being more of service centers. So you could say eventually, and I work for some small dealerships. What's going to happen to our sales staff?
Well, look, to take a page from the auto manufacturer when they talk about, potential agency, agency models, just to clarify what I'm talking about, is you pay a stipend or a fee to the dealer to deliver the car. Yeah, in years past, when I was selling cars in the 70s, we called it a courtesy delivery, right? Someone who worked for GM in your neighborhood is taking delivery of a car, and you got to deliver it to them, and the factory will give you $100 for doing that. So this agency model is a more glorified version of that. So the problem with it is manufacturers, when they talk about it, don't give the dealers any information. So are they going to give dealers, $5,000 a copy? Well, then maybe dealers will say, you know what, let me think about that. Because then I don't need a sales manager. I don't need as many salespeople. I don't need, as big a facility, although that horse is out of the barn already. Yeah. So if I can get $5,000 or $6,000 or $7,000 a copy, then and if that assuages the manufacturer not having to deal with my, my pushy salespeople in their mind, and they can sell the cars directly, and I just have to be the face of the manufacturer, I'll buy into that. The problem is, manufacturers probably will not offer a fair amount of compensation for dealers to do that. They might, in the first instance, to get them to buy in, they might say, well, we'll give you, 7% just to get you to buy in. And then what happens in year 2 and 3 when they've already, rearranged their business model? And certainly they're not going to commit long term. So it's not something that a dealer can really hang their hat on and say, yeah, I'm in for that. So to answer your question, Kara, the dealers really have to say, look, this is my market territory. I'm protected by my franchise agreement. I'm protected by my state statutes. And manufacturers can't compete with me in sales or service. That's what the law says. And, you go to a judge. Judges aren't automotive experts, but they can read. So they'll read the state franchise law. They'll be submitted the facts, the policy proclamations of the auto manufacturer, and they're going to be told this violates the section that says manufacturers can't sell unless they're a Tesla or a Rivian, where they don't have any franchise dealers. The rules are different for them. And that's what I think, some manufacturers forget. Tesla was able to do what it did because it didn't have a framework of existing franchise dealers. So that was a new blank page, so to speak. But Ford and Volvo and Volkswagen can't, unscramble the egg, for lack of a better expression. They have to live with these franchise laws. And, let's not forget why these franchise laws exist in the first place. They're not there to feather the nest of franchise dealers. They're there primarily because the state makes a lot of money on the sales tax that's collected from franchise dealers. Okay, so it's not all about the dealers. It's about the integrity of the state, the financial infrastructure of the state. Secondly, unlike boats, boat dealers don't have franchise protection. Cars are a necessity. They're necessary for a thriving economy, for people to get to and from work. They're necessary for health, safety, and welfare, right? They need to get to the doctor or to a hospital. So the protections in place are to make sure that the driving public, the motorists, have integrity in the franchise system, so that during the period of warranty and thereafter, they don't have to wonder where their dealer is. They know that the dealer is still there, except for, rare exceptions when a dealer is justifiably terminated, which takes an act of Congress really to get accomplished. But consumers now know that they have convenience. So if they decide to buy a car, within 5 miles of where they live, if they need warranty service 6 months later, they don't have to drive 20 or 30 miles away. So yes, the franchise laws exist seemingly to protect the dealer, but they're really to protect consumers and the state and local governments in which they reside. So it's, no one should really, talk about the dealers are protected. There's this great lobby of protectionism. That wasn't the genesis of these franchise laws. Yes, of course, it's to recognize that to open a dealership, you have to invest millions of dollars. So you don't want, it's not the same as opening up a, frozen yogurt franchise where you can get it done for less than your life savings. Dealers have to put in millions and millions of dollars. So the state legislators said it's not fair to put all that money at risk at the whim of a manufacturer who decides, and I've seen this in the boating industry because I do an awful lot of legal work for boat dealers. Their agreements are 1 year long. They're 12-month licensing agreements.
Wow.
So that's why you don't see, Taj Mahals going up for boat dealers, because they don't know if they're going to have that same franchise 12 months later. So there's the dichotomy, and that's why dealers are willing to invest the money they do, and why it attracts, private equity groups and family offices and closely held corporations and public corporations.
Public companies,
they know that those investments are sacrosanct unless, a felony is committed or something along those lines.
Len, this is too important a topic. The next couple of months, I think a lot is going to happen. We have a big event coming up in September at the Fixed Ops Roundtable, and of course, a lot of eyes will be on it from the automotive industry. Would you mind coming back and joining us in September on the Fixed Ops Roundtable and bringing us up to speed? And I'm sure there'll be a lot of developments that we'll have to talk and how that will affect fixed ops, of course, as well.
Well, that would be a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I think there'd be a lot to talk about, that's for sure, because that's not so far away, and things are unfolding on a weekly basis. So I can't imagine that this all will be solved by then, Ted.
Carol, when is that event in September?
It is coming up quick. I'm so excited for our Roaring 20s Fixed Ops Roundtable. It's September 20th, 21st, and 22nd, and it's going to be all virtual, so you can get your complimentary tickets now at fixedopsroundtable.com.
Great. Well, we're looking forward to that, the Roaring 20s, and having Len Bellavia join us at that. Len, can you believe these events are now they're all 3 days long? There's so much to talk about in the fixed ops space. So,
well, getting a ticket to your event is like going to an Elton John concert now, Ted. You seem to have put on A-list type shows. So, your reputation precedes you now, and I've attended them. I know the information anybody who's in the car business, whether you're a manufacturer, dealer, or someone like me who needs to understand what's going on the front lines, they're invaluable. So I'm certainly be the first one to sign on that day. I'll be there. Thank you.
All right. Well, Len, we will see you there in September. Thank you so much. Len Bellavia, the founding partner at dealerlaw.com, Bellavia Blatt. And Len, thank you for all you do for our industry as well. We'll see you in September. Kara, thank you very much for hosting with me tonight as well.
Of course.
Kara, Ted, thank you. Thank you both. I appreciate it very much.
It's a pleasure, guys. And on behalf of Ted and Lynn, I'm Kara Delane. We'll see you next Monday at 8 p.m.